Good morning. Welcome to the Second Amendment class. I'm Dave Marcus, and along with George Whiter and Lauren Wood Viscardi, we're going to be hosting the class. And without further ado, everybody knows Sal, and here's Sal.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Dave. Today, what I want to talk about is the art of manipulation, smoke and mirrors, how to move the things around the table so that you can make people see things that aren't there and believe it. Um, so, as I said last week, as I indicated, it's important to recognize that we have three political forces at play. First, we have the Democratic Party and what it represents, what its brand is about. Then we have the Republican Party and the brand that it developed, and there were conflicting views, and we would have elections to select one view or the other. Then along has come the third element, and that is the groups that formed, um, I would say, beginning at the end of the Civil War, but probably continuing, really getting a footing at the end of World War II, even during World War II. And those were the uh, prime industrialists who were fearful of the American government continuing on in its role as a manufacturer. During World War II, 70% of American manufacturing was run by the American government in one form or another. We had government controlled and government operated manufacturing facilities, and they also had the authority to go into any manufacturer that affected the war effort to ensure that they were being managed in an effective way. So the government was very much involved in manufacturing, and the industrialists did not like that. And so they formed a group. They used the National Association of Manufacturers, the Chamber of Commerce, other organizations to come together as to one group and to start a public relations campaign to undermine government control of manufacturing. Charles Koch, whose father was an organizer of the John Birch Society, he also became heavily involved in this consortium, and he becomes the head of he and his brother David become the head of the Libertarian Party. But then Charles Koch really starts what's become known as the Koch network. And they put together a long-term strategy, which is to undermine faith in the American government. And to do so, they needed credibility. So they organized institutes, think tanks that would have people with PhDs and some credentials that would make their case. They knew that they couldn't do it overtly, so they operated covertly, um, and laid a groundwork that has led to the election of a convicted felon to be the president of the country. I think it's important to recognize that the brand that existed with Ike is a very different brand than is there today with Trump. And it's important to know that the people behind the scenes in the Trump administration are the product of the Koch network. The Project 2025 was written by the Heritage Foundation, and the Heritage Foundation was founded and funded by Koch. Um, There's also the Federalist Society, which we'll talk a little more about, which was also initiated and funded by Koch. And so we're facing the prospect of the federal government being populated with the American Heritage Foundation and the courts and Justice Department occupied by the Federalist Society. And so when we look at smoke and mirrors, it's an idea of manipulation. The objective is to be able to take the words of the Second Amendment, take that sentence apart, erase words that you don't like, and then by using highbrow words to give it an appearance of authority. And at the same time, the goal is to insert words that are not attributed to the Constitution, while making it appear as if the words are in the Constitution, specifically citizens' militia and tyrannical government, not in the Constitution. But you weave them in, as a justice writing an opinion. You weave those words in. You don't attribute it to the Constitution, but you make it seem as if that is a part of the Constitution. The final product, as I see it, I'm rewriting the Second Amendment according to what Scalia's opinion said. It is that a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people, and each individual in or out of the militia to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Adding, thereby allowing citizens' militia to form and attack government tyranny. And so Scalia is faced with the daunting task of adding words that are not there. He sees the words in his imagination, but the words are not there. And so he must get his hammer and chisel so he can make room for his original version of the original text. So we have a well-regulated militia. This is one of the problems, is that pesky word militia is in the sentence. And so Scalia's task is to neutralize militia. It's as if he wants to take an eraser to the Second Amendment and simply eliminate it. And so he must add to it citizens' militia and attack against tyranny, the government. And so these are, this is the task before Justice Scalia. And it's you have to do some mental gymnastics to get there. It's easy for him, though, because all you have to do is dig into your English sentence structure book, blow away the dust, and separate the sentence into the prefatory clause and the operative clause. The prefatory clause merely states the purpose of the sentence. The really important part is the operative clause. But wait a second here. The prefatory clause states the purpose of the sentence. Is Scalia making his own counter-argument? The purpose is the militia. The purpose is not the individual right to own and possess a weapon. The purpose is not addressed in the Constitution, which means the purpose of a personal right to a weapon is not addressed in the Constitution, which means it is for the states to take up the issue. Remember, all the powers given to the federal government are listed in the Constitution. Those that are not are for the states to handle. So the text is separated into its two clauses: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia free state is the prefatory clause. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And if you recall, in the first class, I wanted to highlight a YouTube class on the Second Amendment that changes this lowercase t into an uppercase t. So they are they're totally eliminating a well-regulated militia so that you have the right of the people to keep and bear arms. But that's not enough for Scalia. And this is where the sleight of hand is particularly pernicious. He takes the First Amendment to petition for redress of grievances shall not be infringed, and he makes it a part of the Second Amendment. This from an originalist. In his analysis, page 8, Scalia says the Second Amendment would be nonsensical if it read, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of free state, the right of the people to petition for redress of grievances shall not be infringed. Where did that come from? I mean, it has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. Scalia also introduces the idea that the Second Amendment connotes an individual right to keep and bear arms. From page 2 of his decision, the amendment's prefatory clause announces a purpose, but it does not limit or expand the scope of the Second Amendment. The operative clause's text and history demonstrate that it connotes an individual right to keep and bear arms. The definition of connotation is an idea or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literal or primary meaning. Again, we must wait a second. Scalia says he is constrained by the text. Amy Coney Barrett discussing what the court is supposed to do. We're not supposed to make policy. We're supposed to read the text for what it says and apply it to the case before us. He must deal with the words. Where is it stipulated that a justice is supposed to respond to his feelings of what a word invokes? So we're not talking about the text. We're talking about how Justice Scalia feels about the words in the text. Here, Scalia goes over the top. He doesn't quote from the text. He weaves into it the notion of a citizen's militia to fight a tyrannical government. Page 22 of his opinion. If, as they believe, the Second Amendment is no more than the right to keep and use weapons as a member of an organized militia, if, that is, the organized militia is the sole institutional beneficiary of the Second Amendment's guarantee, it does not assure the existence of citizens' militia and a safeguard against tyranny. He's right, it doesn't. But he weaves those words in there as if those words are in the Constitution. The Constitution gives Congress the authority to tax, fund, and train a militia. And it says that those in the militia have the right to a weapon. And it also says that the militia is there to put down insurrections. There's the text again. And so Scalia now wants to attempt to bring history into it. And what does he do? He goes back. Clearly, he yearns for the good old days of the British Empire. He reverts to England's history, England's glorious revolution, the cultural importance of hunting, He skips past the actual events at the time the amendment was written. Slave owners depended upon the militia to put down slave rebellions and to fight Indians. The historical context was there between the fight between the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist and what their arguments were. Anti-Federalist Patrick Henry, governor of Virginia, raised controversy over control of the militia. Henry argued non-slave states would act against the slave states, using the federal government to disarm the Southern militias. This is before the Second Amendment was drafted. Madison wrote the Second Amendment for Patrick Henry. According to Professor Carl Bogus, one of the key issues for the Federalists at the time was the militia, and what he says is that Patrick Henry, George Mason, and the other anti-federalists raised many arguments against ratification. One of the accusations they flung at Madison was that he and his fellow delegates at the Constitutional Convention had handed Congress a terrible weapon, the ability to subvert the slave system by disarming the militia.
One delegate, a Virginia planter named James Madison, arrived at the convention 11 days early. He came armed with a complete plan for a new government, based not on the states as independent governments, but on the people as a whole. Madison had been doing his homework.
The union of so many states is, in the eyes of the world, a wonder.
If there's someone in America today who reminds me a little bit of Madison, it's Bill Gates, this nerdy, awkward guy who really found this field in which he could excel. James Madison, this shy, studious, awkward man, became the father of the Constitution.
James Madison was the eldest child of one of Virginia's most prominent families. A frail, sickly boy, he immersed himself in the world of the mind. By the age of 9, he was devouring the books in his father's library. By 11, he could read French, Latin, and Greek.
If I were to say who's going to get the highest grades on the SATs, I think it's probably Alexander Hamilton. But Madison's right up there.
He was 5.5 feet tall, slight of build. He suffered from these nervous fits, and no one's been able to figure out exactly what he suffered from. It seemed that he was just this intense, nervous sort. He was subject to these anxiety attacks.
When he came back from the College of New Jersey in the early 1770s, he doesn't have any firm sense of where he's going in life.
As for myself, I am too dull and infirm now to look out for any extraordinary things in this world.
I've always thought Madison was the kind of guy who, the revolution came along, it really gave him a sense of purpose. Madison's sense of who he was and what he wanted for the country was very much defined in the crucible of the revolution.
The 18th century equivalent of 4F, Madison decided that if he couldn't fight on the battlefield, he'd do it in the legislature. At the age of 25, he threw himself into politics, becoming one of the youngest men to attend the Virginia Constitutional Convention. Out of 13 very divided states. From his country seat in Pleasant Grove, Virginia, veteran orator Patrick Henry raged against the Constitution, even before he finished reading it. From September of 1787 through the winter of the following year, the former Voice of Thunder emerged as the most fervent leader of the Anti-Federalists, those opposed to ratifying the new document.
The simplest way to understand is that anti-federalists argued that if the Constitution is adopted, the state governments will simply wither away.
That this is a consolidated government is striking. And the danger of such a government is very striking. Who authorized them to speak the language of we the people instead of we the states?
Henry felt that the central government threatened the liberty of the people. Most importantly, he felt that it absolutely had to have a Bill of Rights that protected the freedoms and liberties of people.
The rights of conscience, trial by jury, liberty of the press, all your immunities and franchises. Will the abandonment of your most sacred rights tend to the security of your liberty?
Henry is so upset by the Constitution. He can't control himself. He's making so many charges. Some of them are so violent, and he's ranging so back and forth that in effect, he kind of dissipates the anti-federalist energy, and he makes it easier for the other federal speakers to kind of come back and hit him, point after point after point.
Meanwhile, the Federalist faction, led by Madison in Virginia and Alexander Hamilton in New York, had been waging a much quieter campaign with a series of essays. The Federalist Papers clearly and calmly explained the Constitution's goals. Hearken, Eric. As his own death approached, Patrick Henry too found his popularity waning, primarily due to his opposition to the Constitution. Ironically, it was Henry's passionate tirades about the lack of an American Bill of Rights that actually helped force the bill into existence.
Liberty, greatest of all earthly blessings. Give that precious jewel, and you may take everything else.
I think that in many ways that may be his greatest contribution to American history and to the history of our country, that his relentless drive to have a Bill of Rights demanded, because of his political power at that time, that they had to develop one.
Nope. Sorry, you got the wrong one there. Hang on. Okay, I want to highlight play a segment that I played last week. Again, Scalia talking about how he brought history into the evaluation of the Constitution. Mind you, he's interviewed by a guy. This is not by accident. Here he is. He's a mature man. You can tell by the gray hair. He's smart because he wears glasses. He's dressed conservatively. This is your reasonable guy who's doing this interview, as Justice Scalia explains how he brought history into the picture.
I said it triggered historical inquiry because the Second Amendment refers to it as though it were a pre-existing right. It didn't say the people shall have the right, or even the government shall not take away on it, but rather the right of the people to keep and bear, as though it was a pre-existing right. And that triggered historical inquiry that takes you back to the English Bill of Rights, which sure enough contained the right to keep and bear arms. As for the prologue, if you really want to know what the prologue is, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the defense of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Again, if you study history, what's the connection between not taking away arms, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, and the militia? It seems very strange. But historical inquiry shows you what the connection is. The way the Stuart kings, the Catholic kings, destroyed the militia, which was supposed to be all of the male citizens trained to arms. The way they destroyed the militia was not by abolishing it. They just took away the arms of all of those who were opposed to the Catholic kings.
And so Scalia has to go back to the 1600s to make his case. And he doesn't, there's a lot of history in the 1700s in what were the colonies, a lot of history. Indian wars, slave rebellions, lots of bloodshed. But no, Scalia goes right past all of that. How does he get there? By this new technique, corpus linguistics.
Well, most Supreme Court justices did not graduate from law school. Of the 114 Supreme Court justices in our nation's history, 49, only 49 actually graduated from law school. The first Chief Justice, John Marshall, attended the very first law school in the country at William and Mary, but did not graduate. Harvard Law School was not invented until 28 years after the United States Supreme Court opened for business. Lawyers became lawyers the same way blacksmiths became blacksmiths. Training. You trained as an assistant to a blacksmith, and eventually you could go into business as a blacksmith yourself. Abraham Lincoln, who never even went to elementary school, was entirely selfish. He read law books, got some training in a law office in Illinois, and eventually became a very good lawyer. The last Supreme Court justice who didn't go to law school was Jimmy Burns, who went from being a South Carolina senator to the Supreme Court in 1941. He was, of course, confirmed unanimously without even having a Judiciary Committee confirmation hearing, as was the custom in those days. In fact, Jimmy Burns was confirmed by the Senate on the same day that the Senate received his nomination from the president. He was the last of the no law school Supreme Court justices. Since then, Harvard Law School graduates and Yale Law School graduates have come to dominate the Supreme Court and the rest of the federal judiciary. Now, federal judges are supposed to arrive in their jobs with enough education to actually do their jobs. But in the 21st century, Republican billionaires have decided law school isn't enough. And so they have been hosting federal judges on very expensive vacation trips to luxury resorts, including a luxury ski resort in Deer Valley, Utah, where some of the judges' time is spent on the receiving end of lectures about something called corpus linguistics. Molly Redden reports it all in a new article in Huffington Post under the headline, "Inside the Ritzy Retreats Hosting Right-Wing Judges." She reports that corpus linguistics, quote, essentially works like a search engine that returns every example of how a word or phrase was used in a select database of historical texts. But the leading proponents of legal corpus linguistics see it as something more, a powerful new tool to shore up the legitimacy of the conservative legal movement. Now, judges claiming to be interpreting the Constitution as it was originally understood could wield the imprimatur of big data. With a 6-3 stranglehold on the Supreme Court and Trump judges dominating federal appeals courts, the right wing has increasingly pushed the legal view that the law must be interpreted based on history and tradition. Yet few have failed to notice how perfectly history in these judges' rendering aligns with current Republican beliefs on issues like guns and abortion. Corpus linguistics offers one way to dodge these criticisms. A judge who could keyword search millions of lines of historical text, the thinking goes, is a judge who could ward off accusations that his version of history was invented for a partisan outcome. The report describes the workings of a nonprofit that calls itself the Judicial Education Institute. The first retreat they hosted for judges was, quote, 6 days at the Greenbrier, an opulent 11,000-acre West Virginia mountain resort. At least 11 U.S. district and appeals court judges listened to speakers vaunt the potential of corpus linguistics in the mornings. In their free time, they could indulge in one of the Greenbrier's 4 golf courses or miles of trails. Deer Valley, the same ritzy resort where Gwyneth Paltrow skied into legal trouble, provided an even more exclusive backdrop. At least 7 federal judges attended. 1 U.S. district judge, Stephen McGlynn, reported his trip alone cost the Judicial Education Institute $5,558. Now, how do we know how much Judge McGlynn's free trip was worth? It was a mistake. Judge McGlynn disclosed that number by mistake, not realizing that he was not required to disclose how much the trip was worth. And so we don't really know how much the judges are actually taking in the form of vacation luxury. So of the work of the Republican judges using corpus linguistics, some of it has found its way into Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's opinions. University of Connecticut Law School professor Anya Bernstein says, a lot of what legal corpus work tends to do is allow you to pick and choose your history. You pick and choose your corpus. You pick and choose what you're putting into the software. You pick and choose your results. Today, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse said this.
They've opened up a whole new arena for fake fact finding with the new so-called history and tradition analysis that they brought to bear on Dobbs, on reproductive rights cases, and in Bruin on gun rights cases. Because you can fake your way through history and tradition very easily. You just go back into history and you cherry pick the facts that you like. Real historians will come in and say, well, that was ridiculous, but it doesn't matter. You got what you wanted. And the ability to do that fake fact finding is going to get worse, not better.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He chairs the subcommittee on federal courts. He is also the author of Captured, the Corporate Infiltration of American Democracy. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. You know, I read these articles that are all new to me, always thinking, how is the Senator Whitehouse reading this? And I'm sure it's not with any element of surprise.
No surprise at all. If you look at the billionaire-funded effort to influence our judiciary, they've been picking judges and justices. They've been creating doctrines for them in billionaire-funded doctrine factories. They've been presenting them to the judges and justices through billionaire-funded front groups that file amicus curiae briefs in cases that are brought by billionaire-funded litigation groups. And as indicated here with the Greenbrier and Deer Valley, they're also indoctrinating the judges in the doctrines that they're trying to get them to adopt by taking them to fancy resorts so that they can learn what they're supposed to do. And unfortunately, this is not new behavior. For a long time. Very wealthy special interests have been taking
No sound. Sal, you're muted. You're muted too.
The category of data you want to search can be designed to produce a certain result. I mean, if people watching this now were imagining us 100 years from now doing such a search and asking for Republican senators' views of X, you will get a bunch of quotes that would fit a certain way of thinking, but would leave out everything that Democratic senators were saying about exactly the same thing at exactly the same time.
Yeah, as they say in computer business, garbage in, garbage out. only in this case, it's not just garbage it's specifically chosen garbage in order to produce the desired garbage out. And then because of the Supreme Court doing this reversion to a history and tradition form of analysis, something that was not the regular form of analysis until Bruin and Dobbs, it's opened up this whole field for cherry picking of the historic record for the judges on the Supreme Court to create. And weirdly, the hearing, the resort trip that was discussed happened in, I want to say, October of 2022. These two decisions, Bruin and Dobbs, that developed the new history and tradition analysis, they were only decided in June of 2022. So it's incredible how fast these billionaire-funded groups were able to get their indoctrination training out to take advantage of this brand new history and tradition standard. That's like 4 months. You can't even organize a parade in 4 months. And these people had this all teed up to fit into the history and tradition analysis 4 months after those were adopted by the court.
And before I know, certainly, the techniques they were using in their so-called historical research, we had historians on this program from Harvard, from Yale, from Stanford, finding great fault with the amateur history work done by Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a trained lawyer, and I've been doing trial work and litigation and legal analysis for a long, long time. That's what I'm trained for. And that's what Supreme Court justices are trained for. They're not trained historians. And particularly if they come at it with a bias, because the same billionaires who got them put on the court want them to adopt.
His sound will come back.
I don't have any sound here. I'm not sure. Can you control and tell me? Am I the only one who doesn't have sound? I don't have any. Oh, okay, we're back to some there. Okay,
I'm back.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say the notion that this is an accident is completely mistaken. It's not just bad history. It's deliberately contorting history to get to results that the same donors who got you on the court want you to arrive at, and have told you how to get at through all amicus briefs that they file in these little flotillas of front group briefs. It is a systematized indoctrination of a court that has been captured.
What is at stake in the presidential election when you look at the potential judicial nominees of a second-term President Biden or another Trump term?
It's pretty stark. The Trump appointments have been really dramatic in terms of taking away rights from people. And if with a 6-3 majority, it's a pretty powerful majority. But if you got to, 7-2, it gets even wilder. And it also builds in over a longer period of time the ability of big billionaire donors to manipulate and maintain and cosset a Supreme Court that will do things to the American public that even conservative Republicans would never do in Congress because they get voted out. So it's a really, really dangerous end run around the American democratic political system that gets only more dangerous and dynamic as the majority grows.
Okay, the Supreme Court confirmations has changed from consensus to disputes, to where they cannot all agree on the qualifications of a prospective justice. Here we see over many years that the 90% are voting to confirm. Then it starts to drop off, particularly with the Roberts Court. Why is there so much disagreement here? what we have is, while the Federalist Society and the American Bar Association are organizations for lawyers, the key difference lies in their ideological stance. The Federalist Society is primarily composed of conservative and libertarian lawyers, while the ABA is considered a more moderate organization focused on broader legal issues without promoting specific political ideologies. Therefore, lawyers who identify with a more conservative or libertarian viewpoint are more likely to be involved with the Federalist Society, while lawyers seeking a more general legal community would likely join the ABA. And note that the ABA has 1.3 million members, the Federalist Society, 65,000. Okay, we're going to get into more of the deeper history that led to the Second Amendment, that provided the foundation for the Second Amendment, but we'll pick that up in subsequent classes. Okay, we'll stop there, and Dave, we can open up for discussion.
Madeline would like you to go back to an earlier screen where you had the Second Amendment and the stuff that Scalia invented in there. Way back in the beginning.
This is this. All right. Right. I believe this is the one you're talking about, Madeline. And it's where, as I'm saying, it comes out as a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people, and each individual in or out of the militia to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, thereby allowing citizens' militia to form and attack government. Let me also highlight here something that you might find important. Are the fact sheets up, Dave?
It says Second Amendment, and there are 4 sheets on the left. The Second Amendment, all 4 things. You can't see them, they're small.
Let me just do it this way.
The little notes.
Let me try it this way. Share it. This one, share. Okay, this is
I got it.
from Georgetown Law Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection, and they have fact sheets on unlawful militias for all 50 states, because the 50 states have outlawed a private militia. If you have a street gang comes together and they call themselves a militia, they're not legal. And that's what, the people who attacked on January 6th, they were street gangs. And so what you have is the only militia that is authorized, and I'll send this out with the follow-up notes, but the only militia that is legitimate is the National Guard. That's it. So the idea of a citizens militia is utterly made up.
Right.
If people want to raise their hands and ask a brief question to Sal, and then we'll come back and let you do follow-ups after everybody else gets to speak. Madeline?
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Okay, 2 things. One, the irony of these people pushed by the Federalist Society to be originalists, and then they put extra language in. And really the whole idea of originalism to me is just so crazy because, this was written in the 1700s. There were no AR-15s or AK-47s or Uzis or anything like that. And wasn't it Jefferson who said we should have a new constitution every 20 years or so? I mean, this is just so insane. Secondly, I think it was in the 90s that Hillary Clinton was vilified for saying there was a vast right-wing conspiracy. Well, guys, here it is. We're living in it. My dad worked for Sinclair Oil Company for most of my childhood, and we lived in Kansas City for a long time. And the Koch brothers, their oil company was in Wichita. So he knew the old man Koch, who's dead, and he knew Charles Koch. And my dad was a, conservative Republican businessman in the oil business. And the first time he met old man Koch and Charlie Koch, he came back home and said, "Those are the two craziest people I have ever met." And that was back in like the early 1960s. So just thought I'd throw that out.
Oh, no. Well, yeah, I find that very interesting. But understand that vast right-wing conspiracy, you could reword that into a oligarch strategic plan for dismantling the American government.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it was. And that's what it is. I mean, we have to understand today, the people with power in government have an objective to dismantle the American government.
They've already started. They started on day one here of Trump's second term, letting out.
We're talking about getting rid of FEMA. We want to get rid of the emergency
and
management.
the Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that does weather forecasting and disaster all of that, let alone the Department of Education.
They want to get rid of all of that.
And now they're already talking about cutting Medicaid to give tax cuts to billionaires. Yes. Okay, I'll stop.
No, I think it is important to recognize that this strategy has worked very well. And it's important to see what it is.
Anybody else have any comments? Use the raise the hand function. Anyone?
Give him a chance.
He's too depressed to talk.
Mm.
But I would say that our political situation has let us let this all happen. So people have voted in this type of thing. And as a benchmark of what they're probably following, who followed us originally, Mr. Hitler went from nothing to in charge of everything in a very, very short amount of time. And we know that his work came out of, our Civil War. So I'm sure that the Trump administration is going to follow that and see how far they can go in 2 years and just get her done.
But I'd like for you to come away from this class understanding that this isn't something that's happening in the short term. This is a product of 75 years of a campaign.
Right, but this is the fruition it's come to.
I understand. What I'm saying is that the voters going out, the voters have been subjected to a public relations propaganda campaign that's been initiated over the past 75 years, making the landscape ripe. This was done covertly, underground, that vast right-wing conspiracy that we were talking about. It's just this is not something that just happened overnight. And
No, that I am agreeing with you.
using something like the Second Amendment and all the gyrations, the mental gymnastics, all the manipulation to be able to take that thing, make it a controversial issue, and to distort the words for their agenda may seem crazy, but that was their strategy and it has worked.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying that the timeline now is even going to be shorter. That they're working fast and furious.
They're in power. So it's gonna you're gonna see changes real quickly. Yeah.
Nancy?
Well, there's something similar going on in Europe, in some of those countries over there. And I'm wondering how this ties in with this movement of the one world, with the one government, with the one authority over all the countries in the world movement that's been going on behind the scenes. Now, I don't know, whether our country would fall. I mean, I'm sure in somebody's mind, our country falls under that policy of the one world, but I'm not sure whether the Trump policies are in sync with those in Europe or not. If you watch what's going on in Europe, it's similar is what I'm saying. And I'm hearing a lot about this one world policy. So one world government. You know anything about that, Sal?
Well, it's a propaganda campaign. Mind you, at the end of World War II, the world leaders recognized that they had experienced throughout the 20th century madness. It was pure madness. And when everyone was left in rubble and blood, they decided, okay, we need to do something different as a species. And so they formed the United Nations. They formed other things to bring together the people of the world so that we weren't simply butchering each other year after year after year. Now, there are people who are threatened by that. And those are the oligarchs because it takes away their power. And what you get is you then take that effort and you convert it into these guys are trying to take power. The UN is trying to take power away from us, the fossil fuel industry people. And so, it's important when you hear that stuff to try to look through it and see where the manipulation is taking place.
Norman? Oops, wait a sec.
One of the first executive orders that Trump signed had to do with the 14th Amendment of birthright citizenship. And I can foresee an analysis that Alito or someone else could write using so-called history and tradition, saying that the birthright citizenship was intended only to apply to freed slaves. And therefore, it doesn't apply to everyone else. And was interesting that Trump discussed or some people raised the way that citizenship is determined in the United Kingdom, where at least one parent has to have a right to be in the country, either citizen or naturalized. And it falls right into what you're saying about adding language to the Constitution.
Right.
And I could see that this Supreme Court doing that. If you look at the Jackson versus Dobbs decision, it's based on some historical tradition that Alito made up.
He had to go back to a 16th century judge to find a quote. I mean, really, it's, you know, the thing is as this stuff is going on, Norman, and people are raising the flag, trying to shine a light on what's going on underground covertly to create this, most people would respond by, oh, wait a minute, there's nothing in the Constitution that would allow them to do that. You know, but that would have to go before the Supreme Court. And we have this image of the court that is predicated upon all those years where the justices who were nominated were vetted by the Bar Association. Now they're vetted by the Federalist Society. And so we have this belief that our system is a system of institutions, that we are a nation of laws and all of that. But there are people of great power and money who do not want that. The Chevron case was to take all that was done with the EPA, OSHA, and the others and throw it out. And mind you, there's people who say, well, you know, he's a Democrat. He's just making the argument for the liberal side. For anybody who doesn't know, the EPA, OSHA, and all the rest came from Richard Nixon. You know, it's why I talk about how that group, there was an infiltration and insurgency that went into the Republican Party to do a hostile takeover, and they succeeded. And you can see now that really Republicans are in disarray. They don't know what the hell to do. They've been totally swamped, and the Democrats are equally perplexed. All the traditional political people are shocked is that the foundations of the country have broken. When the court gives, where in the Constitution does it give the president immunity from prosecution? There's nothing in there. What crime? I would like to know, what crime would a president have to commit for the interests of the country? It really has taken our norms and mores and totally shattered them. So I agree, Norm. It's not a hopeful picture that lies ahead.
The other thing is the courts themselves, how Gorsuch is in the Merrick Garland seat, and how the Democrats, even though they were in power, could not get a bunch of appeal 11th Circuit, Court of Appeals judges in based on what they're able to finally work out. I've never seen it where we just don't, you can get rid of a judge if you really don't like their ideology. I have no problem with that. But to say we're just not going to consider anybody for these posts if we control the Senate, that's never happened before. And then the Republicans have just packed the court.
That's right.
Well, and I would say it's not the Republicans, it's the Koch network that's packing the court and has packed the court.
Yeah.
So, to be clear on it, I really wonder about Comey Barrett, because she still talks about how you're supposed to evaluate a case and only apply it to the case before you. I mean, she's got to be either just a good actress with a put on, or really kind of bewildered as to what she's supposed to do next.
Well, she said it wasn't the law according to Amy until the abortion case came up, and then it was the law according to Amy. So
right, exactly.
But she did dissent in the to a degree, or concurred to a degree in the inventing presidential immunity. So, you know, and she didn't go to Yale or Harvard. She went to a different school. So, I mean, judges sometimes it takes a while for a judge to figure out what it is. I mean, I've known some prosecutors who, when they get on the bench, they're still prosecutors, and you give them a few years, they mellow out a little bit. You know, I mean, it's too early to say for sure how she's all going to turn out.
Well, I would say that's in a normal world.
Yeah.
Right now, in the world that we have, the Supreme Court are employees of the Koch network.
Mhm.
And they will toe the line, no matter how absurd the decision has to be. Nothing could be more absurd than presidential immunity to me. Of course, there's a long list of cases that do not comport with what would be expected of any of the previous courts.
USB Nixon 9-0.
Right. And so, you know, this change is one right now. We've had a hostile takeover of the American government, and we're in for some very rocky days. I think the Second Amendment is a very good example of how that manipulation took place behind the scenes and how they've come up with what they're doing to get to that place of power. But now, I don't know that there's anything that institution or law that matters. Well, on that note,
The cherry
Happy
note.
note.
next week we're going to actually look at the history surrounding the events of the 1700s and what was, you know, big issues before this as they were crafting this new government. Were they thinking about 16th century England and the joys of hunting, or were there more formidable issues such as slave rebellions and Indian wars? And I'm going to suggest that the ideas of hunting were far from their consideration. Okay, well, thanks, everybody.
If everybody can unmute themselves and give Sal warm applause for this very somber presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sal.
Thanks, Sal.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Muskets for everyone.
Oh, Bob, did